Welcome to the Child Care Business Professionals Podcast. I'm Evelyn Knight. Hello, I hope you've had a wonderful week. Today I'm doing an interview, but before we get into that, I just have a couple notes for you. This interview was recorded live at my preschool, so there will be some background noise, so please just try to avoid it. In a couple instances, you'll actually hear my doorbell, but just try to ignore it. It is my first live interview, and doing it at the preschool does make it pretty much impossible to drown out the sounds from the preschool. We are also going to be dividing this into two different episodes. The second half will air next week. And you guys have got to tune in for next week's. We have a pretty deep conversation about mental health for early childhood professionals. And we really talk a lot about how tolling the job of a director and owner in ECE can become, and just the stress and how overwhelming running a childcare center can be. And we really touch on the low wages and just the struggles that we face as ECE professionals. So make sure you listen next week. This week, we will discuss quality rating scales and a couple different things like working with the state on accreditation and different things that are out there. So please enjoy this episode and be sure to join us next week for the second half. I am here today with Tiffany Olivas from the Nevada Department of Education. She is the Education and Information Officer. So Tiffany, tell me a little bit about what you do in your job.
Well, first, thanks for having me. This is really exciting, my first time on a podcast. So at the Department of Ed, my title is Education and Information Officer for the Office of Early Learning and Development. It doesn't really give you an idea of what I do, but basically I oversee the quality rating and improvement system for providers in the northern half of the state. There's someone just like me who does it for Clark County in the southern and Las Vegas, and then we have a statewide administrator too.
Okay, and you know our program here is a part of the QRIS system, which is the Quality Rating and Improvement System, which you said, and we absolutely love it. I know in the beginning we talked a little bit about how my center was a little bit resistant, but since then we have absolutely embraced it, and it has improved my quality tremendously. On a previous episode, I do tell my listeners how we started at a 2-star rating, and I think that was 4 years ago. I can't even remember. It was 4 or 5 years ago. And now we came in at a 4. We're officially a 4-star, even though we scored high enough to be a 5-star, right, which you know is a bitter point for me.
Yes, I do.
Which is also why we're going through NAEYC accreditation, so we can get that 5th star. So let's talk a little bit about the resistance you see in other programs, and similar to what I started with, the type of, misperception people have about the program.
Right. Well, and I just want to add, when you, I clearly remember when you got your first 2-star rating, how absolutely devastated you were.
Yes, absolutely.
And your whole team of teachers. And it was just so overwhelming. And I came here and I drove here and we talked about it.
Right.
And it was really hard for you to say, this 2-star does not represent the quality that we're providing.
Right.
And it was just something, an ERS score or something. And it was just so upsetting to you. And so we had to have like a little counseling session about that's not really representing the quality. Right. Your parents know. And so I think that is a good example when people think about being rated. It's overwhelming because they don't think, who's going to come into my program and, observe my teachers and look at my policies and my practices and say that I'm not quality, because nobody wants to put themselves out there.
Absolutely.
It's a huge judgment call,
right,
and it's very public. Well, it is somewhat public. So I think the idea of being like star rated is very overwhelming, and who wants to do that? It's not an easy task to jump in and go for it. Another thing is just part of the process is having people come into your programs and into your classrooms and do, formal observations and write reports, and just have coaches come in. That whole idea can be so scary,
right,
to a teacher, and nobody wants to, allow people to come in, open your doors to strangers.
And make changes. Yeah.
Yes. And then, be, observed, and these reports are written up. And at one time, even back when you got the star rating, it was very negative.
Right.
It was like all the things that you did wrong, you got a paragraph about what you did wrong, and,
Right.
But then everything that you did well, you just got like a little black box marked. And so, and that is just very disappointing. And it's certainly not anything that I really liked, but the process of being observed and having strangers come into your teacher's classrooms for 3 hours and follow them around with a laptop and write the entire time.
It's intimidating. It really is.
I actually began, before I worked for the Department of Ed, I was an environment rating scale assessor through UNR Cooperative Extension. So I was the assessor that came into the classrooms, and I hated it. I mean, the teachers would just be so nervous and so bummed out that their classroom got picked, because it was a random draw, and they would just be frightened, and it just broke my heart to see those teachers, feeling that way. And I always remind people that, when you're being observed, you kind of have all those chemicals firing your brain. I don't want to do this. I can't do this.
Yes.
I'm not competent. I can't, I'm not going to do good. She's writing down all the things that I'm doing wrong. And so you're not doing your best job. Right. And so that was probably the hardest thing. And I think that's what, a lot of the pushback is about, just having someone come in and do an observation,
and to point out what you're doing wrong, which it's so hard. I know for me that was one of the hardest things, but of course we had the most wonderful coach in the beginning, which was awesome for us. But I think what was really tough for us is when we got that 2-star, it was based on a 3-minute mistake. We made, and it actually wasn't even a mistake. It was just we had left a child in, I think it was a bumbo for 3 minutes longer than the 20-minute allotted period.
Yes.
So it took us, so that was devastating. That it was really tough for us to deal with, because when you looked at the reports, it was are you kidding? 3 minutes took us from a 4 to a 2. So that was really tough. But since then, you guys have changed the scale that you're using, which we just went through the ECEE 3, which I love. The new program in the ECEE 3. And the reason I want to bring that up is because it sounds really scary that, and I don't want to intimidate people out there when I say, 3 minutes took us from a 4 to a 2-star, which the new standards seem to have taken those kind of things away. It's definitely more based, I feel at least, it's more based on our strengths. It's not so picky about those little 3-minute periods like that. It definitely seems a lot easier to achieve. What do you think about?
I do. I think, the nice thing about moving to the latest edition is, the environment rating scales, they've been around for a while, I think since 1997 or something, but we have learned so much more about what quality is. And that knowledge is, continuing to increase. And with time, we just know so much more. And I think that the authors of the book, with feedback from providers and local QRIS administrators, they've really made changes that make sense to them based on, outcomes of the children and what really is quality. And so it's really nice, that they are always continuously working on their quality improvement. And as a state, we want the tools that we use for those observations to, be the most up to date, but also reflect what's going to benefit the providers.
And I have to, as a provider, I think they're a lot more realistic now. It's, as a private owner also, there were just certain things that we knew we couldn't overcome. I couldn't overcome 100% of the group sizes and different things. So there is a little bit more flexibility, which makes it more realistic for us in the private sector, I think. So for those of you out there listening, don't be afraid of, especially if you're familiar with the ECEE R. The ECEE 3 is much more realistic for us in the private. It's not as intimidating. It's not as financially tolling as an owner. And as a director, it's definitely more achievable.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I do think the nice thing about ECEE and ITERS, the third edition, is that it gives a lot more power to the teacher.
Yes.
Before the observation, your scores would be based on a lot of things that you couldn't control, like the space in your class. I mean, there's just a lot of things that a teacher is like, I have that's nothing to do with me. I can't, create space for whatever.
And teachers can't control what supplies I supply them with.
Absolutely.
Right.
So this has, the E3 and the I3 is what we call them. They have so much more focus on interactions and actually, what you do with the children while they're using materials in your classroom. So it gives the teacher a lot more power.
It gives them a lot more power, which that part can be a little bit scary for a director because you are, especially for me, I'm a control freak. So when you know that you've got, okay, now it's all in their hands.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you have a really well-trained staff, it doesn't have to be scary. One of the things we teach here now is it has to be your everyday normal. I think a lot of people I talk to think that they can just put a performance on the day that the assessors come out, but we teach our staff now that no, it has to be your everyday normal because for me as a director and owner, I can't go in there once it's happening. It just has to be the habit. And then I'll have the confidence in my staff to know that I don't need to be in there. I don't need to be controlling every little thing. And I can't. I have 6 classrooms. Sure. I can't be in everyone, although I would try if I could. But.
And also, when I was an assessor, it was so obvious when a teacher was trying to change their practice.
When they were faking it. Yeah.
When they were, quote unquote, faking it. Because those children will give you away every single time.
Absolutely.
Miss Tiffany, why are you doing that today? We don't do this.
Right.
Why are we washing our hands when we come? It's just... They're full of questions,
right?
And they will call you out.
They're great about that. Well, and the other benefit I know from just the improvements we made between one assessment to the other, and just having my staff well trained and knowing what they were actually hoping to be assessed. When our actual assessment time came. There was 2 of my classrooms that were really disappointed that they weren't picked. And the ones that were picked
That's amazing.
were okay with it. So it is a huge difference. It takes that pressure off, I guess, when they're confident in themselves, they're confident in their abilities, that they want to prove themselves.
Yeah.
So that's another plus to really working with your coach and trying really hard, is that you get that confidence in your staff and it takes that intimidation. Another technique we use here, which I hope this isn't bad for you guys, but I offer up the center to have the practice. I can't remember what Karen calls them, but the
reliability.
The reliability, yes. So they know my doors are always open. You guys can come do a reliability anytime. And the reason I do that is, first of all, it gives me a report. I get the reports. I can see real time exactly how is my staff performing, where are our weaknesses, where do we need improvement. And the other benefit is my staff is so used to being observed that when it's the real time comes, it's like second nature to them anyway.
Yeah.
So
they're not so scared that they don't know what to do with
exactly.
themselves.
They're so familiar with the assessors that they have no problem with it. So well, I tell Sarah, our coach, too, like, you guys, anytime. Do you guys need to do any? Come on. And Sarah will come and do just assessments all the time, too, because we ask her to.
Yeah.
And that way we know exactly where we stand also. And that way, when the time comes, I'm not scrambling. And if we're just constantly keeping up with it, it's so much easier.
Yeah, I agree.
So, which is also making our accreditation process so much easier, too. It's I can't believe how I expected it to be really difficult. But I kind of look at it like, okay, what do we need to do? It's all ready.
You've been secretly in training this whole time throughout QRIS
to get it done.
To be, accredited.
Right. So let's talk about the long-term effects on the children. What kind of effects do we see? Why? I guess what I'm asking is, why do we want these quality improvements? What's the point of it all?
Well, the point in all quality improvement is that your children will be ready to learn when they get into kindergarten or first grade. But one of the points of QRIS especially is that those children who have an opportunity gap, which are typically the children who are living in a state of poverty, that those kids get the same opportunities for high quality childcare in preschool and pre-K that all the other kids do from, the wealthier families that can afford the nicest school in town. So But ultimately, so like quality improvement, why does that lead to, being ready for, quote unquote, ready for school, which is something that we actually discuss all the time at the NDE. Like, what does that mean, ready for school? So and this is just my opinion, but ready for school, ready to learn means that a child can enter into kindergarten with the tools that will enable them to focus on whatever material is brought to them. So they can, listen to a teacher for an extended amount of time. They can build a relationship with that teacher. They can have like a healthy relationship with a teacher. They have some impulse control.
Yes.
Their social emotional skills, most importantly, enables them to be in small spaces with other children.
Right.
And just to be able to handle themselves. And so the whole process of being in a classroom is not so overwhelming that the lessons are lost. Do you know?
Exactly, right.
Yeah, so,
right. And if we start kids off in the right place, if they enter elementary school on a positive note, they're not going to have that resistance to going to school. It'll actually help them love school instead of dreading it, which in the long run can help them be more successful students. And so our goal is to just prepare them to be able to learn instead of fighting to learn. How am I going to socially handle this? How am I going to, I guess it's just so hard going to kindergarten anyway.
Yeah.
And on top of learning this new environment and being totally overwhelmed, we expect them to learn.
Sure.
So if we can give them those tools beforehand, then they're just ready to go in there and gain the information they need.
And be successful, yeah. And if you can imagine a child that doesn't have those skills who enters into school or, kindergarten and is constantly, getting in trouble.
Yep.
That child is definitely going to dread going to school.
Right.
And definitely
forever.
not.
And they're going to be labeled. And yes.
It's a bad snowball effect there. And it doesn't benefit anybody. So yeah, I guess we think, of it like, we do early childhood professionals do all the hard work.
Right. Right. Exactly. Right.
And then we hope that when we give them to their kindergarten, their new school, their new teachers, that they'll be able to take it from there and those children will be successful. We've laid the foundation without us.
So that the kindergarten teachers don't have to focus on the hard work and they can just teach.
Yeah.
They can help the children learn. And it also helps the classrooms in general because instead of having a group of children that the teachers are constantly having to work on behavior, and the children that are prepared are losing out in that case. So if all children were prepared, they could just focus on the teaching aspect.
Yeah.
It's
a novel idea.
Exactly.
I really think that kindergarten teachers owe us a lot of accolades for all the hard work that early childhood does.
Yeah. We actually have we have a great relationship with our kindergarten teachers. We've actually gone out and established relationships with them just because that is our ultimate goal is to make sure these kids are prepared. But I know we're in a small community, which makes it much easier. But I still think that early childhood programs could still go to their local. We're all within one neighborhood usually. And, so even if you're in a big city, you're still within a small community within that large community.
Sure.
So reaching out and working together is just huge to make sure the children do end up having those tools for success that they need.
Agreed.
So one of the things we were talking about too before we started recording is a quote I told you that I'd written down. I can't remember where I got it from, but it's a great and the reason I bring this up is because I think this is one of the reasons people resist quality improvement and things like the QRES program is because high quality looks like chaos within structure. And I think that a lot of times teachers are used to such rigid daily schedules and they have to stick to that. If their daily schedule says they go outside at 10 a.m., it doesn't matter how in depth the study that the kids could be doing at the science center is, they're going to stop it. They're going at 10 o'clock. And also worksheets, another one of my pet peeves. They think that they have to do these worksheets, and I think it's just this disconnect between I guess they feel like if you don't have those worksheets, if you don't have that really strict structure, it feels chaotic. So that's where I look at it as, I totally agree with this quote, the chaos
Me too.
is actually very structured, because it may look on the surface like it's chaos, but it's actually...
It's part of the plan.
Right. And it's actually a lot... I don't know, it can be harder to pull off, because if you are used to having a lot of control, you have to let a lot of that go. But it's easier in the long run, because you do eliminate a lot of behavior issues. And the children are actually learning a lot more. So is that something you see actually when they start the program, that people just don't want to let go of that control?
Absolutely. And I think it's taught, like it's something, it's like, I call it like the old school way that we did early childhood. And I used to tell, when I used to do a lot more trainings, I would fess up to the fact that I thought my value as a preschool teacher was how well I can run a circle time.
Right.
You know, it's like, get those kids to sit, no touching, listen, pay attention, be quiet, all that stuff.
Yep.
So it was really hard for me, because if those things weren't happening, then I was feeling unsuccessful as a teacher. Now I realize, and I've had a lot of opportunity, because you take me out of the classroom, guess what? Yeah. I get to read about what's happening, the evolution that's happening in early childhood. The teachers in the classrooms with our children, they don't have the opportunity. So, but teaching them that you can have a schedule, you can have a total plan. You can still, if you are that controlling type of person, you can still get that feeling like, oh yes, I'm well prepared.
I'm still in control.
Everything. Yes, I'm still in control. But what you're allowing is for children to learn at their own pace, and pick up things that are of interest to them, and you're allowed to expand on them. So it may seem chaotic, and I do love that quote. It may seem chaotic to the outside person, but it's not. It's actually very controlled.
It's actually
like
more controlled to a certain extent, because you have to there's more planning to a certain extent that goes into it.
It's more difficult.
Yes.
It's a higher level of, and it can be achievable by everyone. It's just kind of getting out of that old school way, which is very hard.
You definitely have to change your thinking, but when you see it in action, and when you see that transformation, it is a game changer. I know that was a huge game changer for my center, and some of my old school teachers really struggled with it, especially telling them you can't force kids to circle time anymore. That was a huge, like, what? I can't make them sit down. But we ended up finding out in the long run, by making these changes, is that when you're doing circle time right, they will come. You don't have to force it. So it's a great way to evaluate yourself too. If you constantly have to tell the children, sit down, pockets on the floor, well,
then it's not appropriate for them.
It's not appropriate. We're not doing it right. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways we got, and the biggest improvements I see, that our kids still go to circle time. And so when I say, like, you can't force it, I know a lot of people listening are probably thinking, what do you mean I can't force my kids? And they just picture chaos. They picture trying to do a circle time with half the room running around. But it's not like that. Once you realize how to do it correctly, they all want to be there. There might be one child who wanders off, but the rest of them are so interested in what you're doing, it doesn't matter. But most of the time, they all will be there. So,
and even if you have a child that wanders off, it's not that they're not getting the benefits of the circle time. I think, when I've observed classrooms that really have figured this process out, they set up activities at a table and say, little Johnny is not in the mood for a circle time today. That's fine, because there are alternate activities that he can do. But truly, he may be doing something with his hands to, like, be physical.
He just needs,
but he's able to listen better.
And he's still absorbing. Yes, that's my son. I have, that was my son.
I think that's my son too.
And I'll tell you, I really had to advocate for my son. When my son was in the first grade, he had a teacher that thought there was something wrong with him for sure. And he was, and I kind of knew he wasn't normal. Like, there was something not quite there, but I didn't think there was something wrong with him because he was excelling and getting everything done. And he was a straight A student, but he was always getting in trouble. So she called in a school psychologist. And they did a whole slew of testing on him. And then the psychologist started getting some suspicions. So they did an IQ test on him. And it turned out that he has a genius IQ.
Oh, wow.
And so it was one of those most redemptive mother moments for me, was sitting in that room the day, and the psychologist actually told the teacher, well, you're just not doing enough to stimulate him.
Exactly.
So
he's bored with you.
He's bored. Exactly. But it's kind of what we're seeing all the time, is we expect these kids to fit in a box.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't fit in our box, we assume something's wrong with them. After that, with my son, I ended up getting it where they had to let him stand at his desk, because he just always had to move his legs around, and he could focus if he was standing. And it just seems like so minor, but it's amazing the power struggles I have had with teachers on just not wanting to let him stand. We are going to end it at that for today. Remember to join us again next week for the second half of this interview with Tiffany. And also, if you'd like to discuss this episode and any others, join our Facebook page. We have a private group at Child Care Business Professionals. I also have another page, the Child Care Business Coach. Be sure to check out the show notes for more information about this interview. Thank you for joining me. Please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. You can also tell me what subjects you would like me to address for future episodes. And one last thing, I would really appreciate a 5-star review. Don't forget to check out all the great resources on my website, www.childcarebusinessprofessionals.com.